Ecuador's President Lenin Moreno has presented his economic plan for the next 4 years. He insisted that it was not an austerity plan.
Entonces, no hay, como se decía, tal paquetazo.
This cannot be called an austerity package, much less for the poor. I thank everyone who took part in the dialogue on production and taxes. We have accepted immediately 8 out of every 10 proposals. Yes, 8 out of 10. And today I am presenting my government's economic plan. We are going to prioritize Ecuadorian families, especially those who have least. We are going to strengthen the dollarization of the economy, manage public finances austerely, and fight contraband, which is the worst enemy of job creation and domestic production.
The Ecuadorian economist Hugo Villacarez told Television's Orlando Perez that President Moreno is hoping the private sector can breathe life into Ecuador's flagging economy.
I think there are 2 or 3 important things which come out of the President's dialogue with different sectors and have been taken up in this new measure. Some of them are related to the plebiscite the President is calling. Essentially, they aim to make the private sector more dynamic. Remember that at the end of President Correa's government, there was a lot of talk about these public-private partnerships, which President Moreno is taking up again, saying that it is important to give incentives to the private sector. I think he's banking on the private sector to boost the economy. I think he's banking on the private sector to boost the economy in the coming years.
Television's Carla Gonzalez is right here in Ecuador, and she has more on these new economic measures.
Thank you, Soyini. So Ecuadorian President Lenin Moreno announced a new list of reforms on tax, labor, and economics. This comes as he's been in office for 5 months, and he has accepted at least 120 of the proposals from the business sector for these reforms. The main reform will be a reduction on taxes for companies making more than $300,000. Another will be a reduction on public spending for up to $500 million. This comes as his labor ministry announced a couple of days before that up to 15,000 jobs in public sector will be cut. Another of the reforms that he announced will be a new type of labor contract. He didn't include if this would mean less or more hours or the obligation to pay Social Security for employers, because this has been a tough criticism because of the business sector saying that they need a more flexibilized market to promote more employment in the country. He also said that these reforms would not increase the prices of gas and electricity, basic services, in Ecuador. And one of the main reforms that he announced would be that he would ask citizens if they want a law that taxes land speculation to be eliminated. He will include this in this upcoming plebiscite, which is scheduled in about 2 months here in Ecuador, where he will ask another controversial question, which will be if people want to put a limit on terms for public officials, meaning that if someone was elected once, then re-elected, he would not be available, he would not be able to run for a third candidacy in Ecuador. So we'll be coming back to you with more information as soon as we hear anything else. Back to you in studios.
Thank you so much for that explanation, Carlo. Still in Ecuador, a bridge that connects the Sante Island with the coastal city of Guayaquil collapsed when a fishing boat crashed into it. Here's some video we've recovered from our social networks of the collision.
Porque se lanzaron, y ahora no puedo correr yo. Que se lanzaron al agua así.
Really shocking stuff. The campaigns for Sunday's regional elections are closing in Venezuela. Dozens of international guests who will accompany the vote have already visited the National Electoral Council in Caracas. 23 state governorships are up for election. After months of violent protests, all of the main parties of Venezuela's opposition decided to take part in the ballot, even though some of them still say they do not recognize the country's existing institutions, including the Constituent Assembly elected at the end of July. Our correspondent in Caracas, Reagan Devines, joins us live now. Reagan?
Hi, Sonia. Yes, campaigning is now officially closed and locked off as Venezuela gets ready for its Sunday's regional elections, where over 18 million people will be choosing 23 governors to run across the country. Now, we've seen very spirited and energetic campaigns from both the government and the opposition. From this evening as well, there's no campaigning and there's no alcohol to be served at all until Sunday evening, until after everything has been completed. On the government's end, today we saw very energetic campaigning, energetic speeches from President Maduro and Governor hopefuls, where they've all been promising their supporters that if they can be elected into the governorship, that they will work hard in terms of maintaining the social support that they give to their citizens, as well as working hard to improve the lives of Venezuelans, because this all comes within the context of this difficult economic war that this government has been fighting against not just opposition forces, but external factors that are involved. On the opposition side, we saw quite energetic as well campaigns throughout the streets of Venezuela, with speakers and jukeboxes and music in the streets. And the opposition has as well maintained to their supporters that if the governors were to gain full control, that they would also work hard in terms of attaining those goals that they want, which is, one, to oust the president and his government, and to restore the country to its former glory in however way they would like to have that done. So you've seen lots of very spirited campaigns on both ends. Now, President Maduro has issued a warning, and this comes after the opposition promised that no governor will swear in front of the National Constituent Assembly. President Maduro said that every governor must be sworn in front of the National Constituent Assembly. This, as you know, is a group of workers and indigenous peoples, persons from different aspects of life in Venezuela, who are all together in this Constituent Assembly, who are in charge really of ensuring peace in Venezuela. And this Constituent Assembly has powers over the president and over the opposition-run National Assembly. And so there has been a very little respect, if any at all, given to this National Constituent Assembly by the opposition. They said, our governors, if they win, will not be sworn in front of this National Constituent Assembly. So that is left to be seen what will happen come next week. Now, today as well, 70 electoral experts came and are here to observe the upcoming election. Their job really will be just to observe and to monitor to see exactly how the election process is, which happens with every election in Venezuela. It is a democracy. And after everything is all done, they will be submitting a report that will state exactly what their thoughts are on how the process went and exactly what recommendations they can give, if any, at all. So we are yet to see what's going to come up this weekend. There is, as I had told you this week, a sense of nervousness in the city because the last elections, which were on July 30th for the National Constituent Assembly, we did see some violence. And of course, this National Constituent election followed 4 months of consistent protest action in the streets, as well as consistent and escalating violence, which we know contributed to losses of lives of over 100 persons here in Venezuela. And the government of Nicolas Maduro has maintained that not only will the National Assembly achieve peace and achieve a progressive stance toward economic recovery, but if their governors were to win all 23, states, then they would continue working as well to peace, economic stability, and the improvement of lives here of Venezuelans, which is exactly what people are ultimately voting for. Sonny.
Thank you so much for that update, Regan. Responding to the Venezuelan elections, the U.S. Department of State published today a statement calling for free and fair elections in the southern country. At a press briefing, spokesperson Heather Newart called into question the organization of the National Electoral Council of Venezuela and described the political situation as a difficult time.
We've not talked as much about Venezuela recently, but as many of you know, there is a gubernatorial election set to take place this Sunday, October the 15th. The United States and the international community are paying close attention to this vote. The United States calls on the regime to hold free and fair elections. We note with great concern that the regime will not permit the presence of independent international electoral observers. We call on the government of Venezuela to permit independent domestic observers to fully monitor the election and the tabulation of its results. The United States is concerned that a series of actions by the National Electoral Council calls into question the fairness of the electoral process. We continue to support the Venezuelan people as they work toward a democratic, peaceful, and hopefully prosperous future. We continue to think of them. We know it's a difficult time, certainly down there.
More news in a minute. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. The devastation left by Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico has already caused a sharp increase in the number of people migrating to the United States. Maria took down most of the island's power supply and left hundreds of communities without drinking water and with severe shortages of food. In just the first days after the hurricane, some 6,000 Puerto Ricans left the country. Some estimates suggest between 20 to 30% of the population may choose to emigrate. Speaking about Puerto Rico, U.S. President Donald Trump referred to the crisis in the Caribbean island in a series of tweets. He showed once again his lack of concern for the situation in Puerto Rico, as the island is still recovering after it was hit by Hurricane Maria last month. In his first tweet, he said Puerto Rico survived the hurricanes. Now a financial crisis looms largely of their own making. He continues by saying a total lack of accountability, say the governor, electric and all infrastructure was disaster before hurricanes, Congress to decide how much to spend. And then finally, he hits Puerto Rico with another blow, saying we cannot keep FEMA, the military and first responders who have been amazing under the most difficult circumstances in PR forever. Across Latin America, indigenous peoples are celebrating their Day of Resistance. Early in the morning at the National Pantheon or Shrine in Caracas, Venezuela's indigenous communities paid tribute to Guayquipuro. He was the most famous leader of the resistance to Spanish colonial occupation in the 16th century, and his memory has become a central symbol of the Bolivarian Revolution. Later, representatives of Venezuela's indigenous communities paid tribute to the leader of the Bolivarian Revolution, Hugo Chavez, at his tomb in Caracas. They recognized his contribution in the struggle for the defense of the environment and for the rights of Venezuela's indigenous communities. It was Chavez who in 2011 decreed that October 12th be recognized as Indigenous Resistance Day. Here on Telesio, we're following the activities of Indigenous Resistance Day around the region. We have reports from Peru and Panama, but first, our correspondent Osvaldo Zayas is in Paraguay.
Here in Asunción, Paraguay, indigenous communities are taking to the streets to recall those who died under colonization, something that they believe continues to affect them 500 years after the arrival of the first Spaniards in Paraguay. We should remember that in this country, over 76% of indigenous communities suffer from hunger. They live in absolute poverty. Indigenous leaders say that in Paraguay, around 18,000 indigenous people are homeless. But there's another thing that particularly affects them: large-scale agribusiness and soy crops, which are depriving them of their lands. Today, they're organizing a coordinating committee with the indigenous organizations. They already had a meeting with Senate President Fernando Lugo to discuss these issues. That's all the information we have here. Back to you, Soini. Thank you, Soini. Today, several indigenous, campesino, and social organizations are developing different activities to reject what is known here as the Race Day or Columbus Day. The slogan of this movement says, "America was not discovered, but invaded. America was not conquered, but looted." This is why they are trying to organize some cultural activities to spread these ideas, which need to be understood all around America. Here in Peru, the education system still refers to the event as the discovery of America, and children are taught about the so-called benefits for America thanks to the arrival of the Spaniards. This is what social movements want to change. This is why they're holding these activities, mainly in the indigenous and Andean towns, where today a homage to Mother Earth will be performed. Also, some cultural acts reaffirming indigenous identity will take place. These indigenous communities have been resisting during all these years, and that's why they call this day October 12th, the Indigenous Resistance Day. We also have to mention that these organizations have said that even though the majority of the nations in Latin America are already independent, the struggle against imperialism must continue, because there are still some countries trying to invade others. This is the way they are talking about the need for the whole continent to remain united. With this information, we return to the studio.
Rubble by a nearby mine. We have this report.
This is a town called the Ghost Community. Officially its name is La Cuchilla, but it was reduced to rubble after operations began at the San Rafael mine just outside the community.
Well, previously, this was a beautiful town with all of the comforts you can imagine. Unfortunately, the mining company came and turned it into a ghost town because they destroyed all of the houses.
Until 2004, more than 90 families lived here in La Cuchilla. Now there are only 16, who say they suffer exclusion, even from the Christian faith.
The priest, as you can see, had the images removed and padlocks put on, so that the people who live here can't get in. It's a way of pressing people to sell their land.
What happened in the community of La Cuchilla, according to the people taking part in the local territorial assembly, is an example of what they call savage capitalism.
This is a criminal economy. As we have said before, because of the blood of families in these rural communities, they are making money and don't care what they destroy.
In the municipality of Casilla, Santa Rosa, peaceful resistance continue against the San Rafael mine. Those affected are some of those most active in the social and popular assembly.
These are communities in resistance. These people who are really suffering the reality of this country and all its effects. They are saying no to mining, no to hydroelectric plants, no to agribusiness.
The Social and Popular Assembly is holding consultative meetings in all parts of Guatemala, examining the structural and historical problems that harm the communities.
Santiago Botón, Telesur, Guatemala.
In the Peruvian Amazon, 16 indigenous communities from the province of Loreto have been on strike for 3 weeks. Their political action has paralyzed the region. The groups are demanding consultations over the renewal of the oil license for the Block 192, as well as compensation for several oil spills. In August, indigenous people living on Peru's largest oil field seized facilities operated by the Frontera Energy Corporation to demand that the government apply an indigenous rights law before signing a new contract with the Canadian company. Colombians are also protesting to demand improvements in education and to support the peace process. Milton Henao was at the march in Bogota.
We continue here in the demonstration organized by the Colombian grassroots people. The two main purposes of the march are the call for a solution to problems in the educational sector and the agricultural sector, and on the other hand, to demand that President Juan Manuel Santos' government fulfill the peace agreements, because so far what they have shown is that they are not willing to implement what they agreed. Many communities today, not only in Bogota but also in many other cities, continue to mobilize.
The fourth round of renegotiations for the North American Free Trade Agreement kicked off this week. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau joined some earthquake relief efforts on his visit to Mexico City. But just a day after talking about NAFTA with President Donald Trump in Washington, his trip was likely to include some uncomfortable moments. During his discussions at the White House on Wednesday, President Donald Trump suggested the possibility of replacing NAFTA with a new US-Canada deal that would leave Mexico out in the cold. We'll be back very soon. As always, stay with us. In a historic moment in modern Palestinian history, Hamas and Fatah have agreed to hand over power to a unity government. After more than 10 years of division, the two rival parties agreed to hand over complete administrative control of Gaza to a unity government by the 1st of December. The decision comes after reconciliation talks were held between Hamas and Fatah on Tuesday in Cairo. The head of the Fatah delegation, Azam al-Ahmed, spoke in Cairo detailing the next steps.
Firstly, this time, and following the orders of President Abu Mazen, who said that we should not return without agreeing, we have to fold the page of division forever, in order to unify the efforts of all of the Palestinian people, and in particularly Fatah and Hamas, so that we can face the occupation and accomplish the Palestinian dream by ending this hateful occupation and achieving the independent Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital.
The United States has formally notified the UN's World Heritage Body, UNESCO, that it is withdrawing its membership of the organization, citing continuing anti-Israel bias and mounting arrears. Following this UN discussion, Israel also announced its withdrawal from the Cultural, Education and Scientific Agency. The US says it will seek to remain engaged as a non-member observer state in order to contribute US views, perspectives and expertise. A State Department statement also said that in 2011, the US canceled its budget contribution to UNESCO in protest against the admission of Palestine as a full member. Our correspondent in Washington, Jorge Gestoso, has more.
The Trump administration announced that it will be withdrawing from UNESCO, the United Nations cultural organization, citing quote-unquote anti-Israel bias. It will be effective by the end of 2018, and by the year 2011 the Obama administration was cutting funding to UNESCO because of the entrance of Palestinians, according to legislation of the US in 1990 and in 1994 that mandates that such cutoff any organization that has to do with Palestinians and belongs to the United Nations will be not funded by the United States. The United States says that it will continue as a non-member observer and will be sharing their expertise and their views. We'll get back to you now.
Thank you so much for that report, Mr. Histoso. The standoff in Catalonia continues as the Spanish government waits for an explanation from Catalan leaders over its declaration of independence.
This afternoon, there have been several opinions coming out of Europe. Today, on the 12th of October, the European Commission has called for dialogue once again, within the framework of the Spanish Constitution. And the European Council has talked about a negotiated solution, but they also made reference to the police violence on October 1st, whilst condemning it. Today, we have also received a Human Rights Watch report, which condemned the use of violence on October 1st, claiming that there was an excessive use of force by the police in order to prevent the referendum election. Today's coverage has been relatively quiet, and I say relatively because even though there haven't been any clashes or casualties at the demonstrations, there was a huge clash outside the main one, where far-right groups almost completely destroyed the terrace of one of the most famous spots in the center of Barcelona. After this, 50 far-right supporters have been identified this morning, and Catalan police have confiscated chains and other objects from them. When it comes to political statements, there were only two. One of them was Maria Dolores de Cospedal, who is in charge of the Spanish defense. She said that security forces of the country are ready to be used in Catalonia if necessary, but she believes that she is almost sure that it won't be necessary. And also, Alfonso Dastres, the foreign affairs official, said on French television that the detention of Carles Puigdemont will depend solely on whether he regrets or not his role in the independence process. Soraya Said de Santamaria, the Spanish Deputy Prime Minister, has asked Puigdemont to seriously think about what he is doing and to step back to be able to ensure, she said, the institutional normality within the Spanish Constitution. This is what we have had today so far, but we're sure in the upcoming days that there will be more headlines coming from Catalonia.
Thank you so much for that, Joan Ortiz. Now let's take a look at some of the other stories happening around the world.
At least 37 people have been killed and an estimated 40 more missing after flash floods and landslides struck northern and central Vietnam. Officials say that around 40 centimetres of rain have fallen in the region since Sunday. The country has seen intense rainfall throughout this year, with an estimated 170 people killed and $36 million worth of damage being caused. Rescue operations are underway across 6 provinces as emergency services begin the search for survivors in the latest disaster. Demonstrations by Kenya's opposition have been banned in business districts in Nairobi and other major cities, ahead of the rerun of the presidential election on October 26. There have been continuous protests over the failure to reform the electoral board after the annulled election in late August. The opposition leader Raila Odinga has announced he will not be running on October 26 due to the lack of such reforms. The opposition strongholds of Mombasa, Kisumu and parts of the capital have seen almost daily demonstrations in the lead-up to the rescheduled election.
Due to the clear, present and imminent danger of breach of peace and public order as witnessed in recent demonstrations, the government notifies the public that, for the time being, we will not allow demonstrations within the central business districts of Nairobi, Mombasa, and Kisumu.
The South African President Jacob Zuma has appeared in court ahead of a ruling by the Supreme Court of an appeal on whether the incumbent president may appeal against charges of corruption. The 783 charges against Zuma include fraud and racketeering. This is the second time that the president and his legal representatives have tried to convince the courts not to reinstate criminal charges against him. Wildfires continued to rage overnight in the Californian counties of Sonoma and Solano as the overall death toll rose to at least 23 people. The wine country turned to wasteland in areas where the emergency services managed to quell the flames, which have destroyed an estimated 3,500 homes and businesses. The town of Sonoma prepared for an evacuation as fires continued to burn. An extra 200 fire engines along with firefighting crews have been deployed from across the country. The Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has slammed the European Union during a press conference in Manila after some of its visiting lawmakers criticised his anti-drugs war, suggesting his country could lose UN membership because of it. Duterte threatened to expel their ambassadors within 24 hours after they warned the president that trade privileges could also be suspended if abuses by the police go unchecked.
And which should not happen in my country. You bullshit. We are past the colonization stage. Wag ninyo akong, don't fuck with us.
Duterte has demoted the country's police force from leading his war on drugs and replaced them with the Drugs Enforcement Agency. An estimated 3,850 people have been killed in anti-drug operations since Duterte took office last year.
We've come to the end of this evening's news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesiostv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Sonia Gray. Thank you so much for watching.